Hi everyone, I'm Amelia Northrup-Simpson, Director of Strategic Communications at TRG Arts, a results-driven consulting firm that works with arts and cultural organizations. We're doing a series on the 6 metrics that arts leaders should be tracking and managing. There are a lot of metrics that we could track in an effort to make our arts organization successful. With today's robust CRM systems, there's no shortage of data on arts patrons and their buying and donating behavior. The truth is, though, what gets measured gets managed. When we decide to track a metric and make changes in our work to move that number up or down, we're giving that metric power. That means we set our priorities as an institution by what we decide to measure. That brings me to our first metric, patron-generated revenue. Measuring this number means that we're prioritizing patrons and the revenue that our organization gets from those patrons. Usually when we look at revenue at a nonprofit organization, we think in 2 buckets, earned and contributed. When we say earned, we mean any capital generated in exchange for services. Ticket revenue, subscriptions, memberships, and classes, for example. When we say contributed, we mean anything given without condition. Individual gifts and bequests, corporate giving, foundation funding, and government grants. Think about where the money is coming from in those categories. Almost all earned income comes directly from patrons, but that contributed category takes into account both money from individual patrons and from funders. What if we instead thought in terms of revenue generated by patrons versus revenue not generated by patrons? Let me say more specifically what I mean by that. Here's an example of the revenue breakdown of a performing arts organization. Single tickets, subscriptions, and classes fall on the earned income side, handled primarily by marketing and by education. The rest is on the contributed side, handled by the development team. Our organization is divided in half here, marketing versus development, earned versus contributed. Let's look at patron-generated revenue now. Which revenue streams here come directly from patrons, those audience members and engaged attendees at our organization? Single tickets, yes. Subscriptions, yes. And classes. And donations come from our patrons. For many organizations, much of our gala revenue comes from patrons as well. Add those up, and we see that 84% of this organization's revenue is coming from patrons. This is a completely different orientation for an arts organization to have. Dividing revenue into earned versus contributed incentivizes arts leaders to think of donors, those advocates and investors amongst our patrons, as this whole separate entity from anyone else that has had an interaction with our organization. But most donors don't give before they buy a ticket, and they often don't give until they love an arts organization enough to commit to a ticket package or subscription. A donation is the crowning achievement of cultivation through the stages of single ticket buyer, multi-ticket buyer, and subscriber. So why is it in a whole separate category? Considering patron-generated revenue honors patrons at every step of their evolution. So how do you calculate patron-generated revenue for your own organization? Add individual giving, including annual fund, major donations, and bequests, to those earned income categories of tickets and subscriptions. And you may have other things to include here, like classes, board giving, or your gala and other events that solicit donations. Anything that comes from an individual patron and not from government or foundation sources will go into this number. You can calculate this as a dollar amount or divide by total revenue to get a percentage. The percentage, as we demonstrated earlier, gives you an idea of just how much your organization is supported by individual patrons, by people. The percentage of patron-generated revenue is not necessarily one that you might want to move up or down, unless you're trying to reduce your reliance on government funding. But in terms of setting priorities for your institution, we can think of no better priority than the patrons who generate the revenue that funds your mission. By measuring your reliance on patrons, you can start to evaluate your activities by how they're going to impact your patrons. Ask yourself where your resources are allocated against that percentage, and what patron-generated revenue sources you're being held accountable for in your position. When organizations work hard and are driven by the right goals, informed by the right data, it works. This metric and the others in this series can help you focus on the right strategies, pointing out what your organization is doing right and what you need to focus on improving. In the next video, we'll talk about active patron participation. To see all the videos in this series, visit our YouTube channel page or the TRG website.